Today we're going to be wrapping up. It's the exciting conclusion of our series called Lead. And we've just been saying over and over for the last several weeks, everybody is given the responsibility to lead. If you have influence over even one person, you have been given this responsibility to lead. And today what we're going to do is we're going to start and we're going to kind of pick up where we left off last week. Last week we ended with like this phrase or this line. We just said this: God has a plan for your life, and you don't want to miss it. Now that usually resonates with people. People really go, yeah, I want that. Like, I want to be a part of a plan. I want to know that God has a plan for my life. But there's a tension, because most of us are sitting there going, but what is the plan? And am I doing it? I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase. There's a phrase that sometimes people say. They say, we are right in the middle, or we want to be right in the middle of God's will for our life. And you look at that and you're like, yeah, that sounds great, whatever that means. But like, how do I figure that out? Like, how do I figure out if like right now I'm right in the middle of God's will? And so my objective for today is, by the end of this service, by the time you leave, that you at the end of the service would be able to go, I know whether or not I am in the middle of God's plan for my life. So let's start in kind of a weird place. We're going to start in Proverbs 16. Proverbs 16:9 simply says this: in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Right? We plan, and God establishes. And being a part of the will of God is really just trying to make this happen. Right? That's what we want. I think most of you can probably relate with this. Several years ago when I was in college, I got married in college. And then right after we got married, we decided that we were going to have a baby. Because, we're in college and we're newlyweds, and how hard can it be, right? Really hard. And so we went ahead and had a baby. Well, what that meant was that my wife was going to stay home and that I was going to just work all the time. So I was going to school full time. I was working like 30, 40 hours a week. And then on the weekends, I had a weekend ministry, and I just didn't have, this was not a sustainable life, right? I didn't have any like free time or any downtime or anything like that. And on top of it, our new baby was a crier, right? Like, how many of you had like a baby that was a crier? I'm not talking about like they cry when they poop. I'm talking about like they cry when they're awake. Okay? That was my firstborn son. He was a crier, and it was just all the time. So there was just like no reprieve. And so we found out that Bethany's sister could babysit for us on a Friday night. I was so excited about that, because we're not going to leave our newborn with just anybody else, but her sister, she's okay. And so we thought we could leave her with her, but her schedule isn't very open, so I knew that this was kind of one of those like one-time shots, and I was so excited about it. When I found out that I was like, I cannot wait. We're going to go out to eat, and we're going to watch a movie. I hadn't seen a movie in so long, right? It had been like months. Anyway, so we're gonna like go see this movie. So I planned my whole week around this. And so the day came. I remember waking up that Friday morning going, today's the day. Right, so I woke up and I went to class at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then I went to work like I always do, and I'm like, I gotta be home by 7 o'clock. If I get home by 7 o'clock, we're gonna like make this happen. And then like something just like went wrong, and it seemed like I was not destined to make it home by 7 o'clock, right? My boss turns to me and he says, you're gonna be delivering firewood today. Now you gotta know what I do for a living at this point. I'm a wood chopper. I would call it a lumberjack, but it's not that cool, right? I did buy some flannels just for the occasion. But anyway, I basically just chop wood all day long, split logs and everything, and then I go home. But today, he wanted me to load up this old rickety farm truck that he had, and he wanted me to go around and make deliveries. And I was like, okay, I don't know where any of the clients are, I don't know where to take the stuff, but I guess I'll try to figure it out. So I get in the truck and I rush around and I'm delivering stuff, and it's just like I'm getting behind, and I've got this plan, and the plan isn't really going my way, right? And I am literally in the truck trying to find this old lady's house, just driving around, can't find it anywhere, and I'm just like praying. I'm like, God, like help me out here, like put a star over it or something, let me find this house. So finally, I get all the deliveries done, and it's 8 o'clock at night already, okay? And I go up to this last house. I've got 2 rick of wood I got to deliver. I got to just drop them off the truck and stack them. And I got to do it in 20 minutes, right? You say it can't be done? Time me, right? So I roar up to the house. I go up to the front door, knock on the front door, nobody answers the door. I drive into the backyard. Now, here's all in the world that's got to happen. All in the world I got to do is I got to raise this hoist on the truck. The wood comes off and I go over and I stack it. Simple. Here's how a hoist works on a truck, right? Put your foot on the clutch, put it in neutral, pull the lever, let out on the clutch, and the hoist comes up. Piece of cake. I've been doing this all day long. I get in there and put the clutch in neutral, put in clutch, pull the lever, up, nothing. Right? I've been doing this all day long, and this thing isn't going to do it. So I do it, and so I go to like a farmer move here, right? Because I'm raised on a farm and stuff, like, so you just like start pushing pedals and things. That's what you do. So I start like revving the engine, hoping it's going to like engage. So I'm in this backyard in this very populated area, and I'm like popping the clutch and pulling the lever and yelling a few choice words and revving the engine. It's like, in the backyard. Can't get this stupid thing to come up. So I reach underneath the seat and I grab a hammer. Farmer move number 2. Crawl underneath the truck and I just start beating on the hoist to the truck and start shaking the hoses and slamming, and I get up there and I try it again, I try to get the thing to come up and it won't. And it's already like 8:45 and I'm coming to the realization my evening is over. It's not gonna happen. And like the culmination of this life that was not sustainable all at once, I just kind of like fell down on the ground and like bawled, right? Now I had somebody in here say, no, you don't bawl, you leak awesomeness, okay? That's what I was doing. I was leaking a lot of awesomeness. But I figured, it's okay, I'm alone in the middle of this backyard. So I fall down, it's like 20 degrees outside, it's snowing, it's just this kind of like bad moment, and I finally just realized it's not gonna happen. So I get back up, and I unload the wood one piece at a time off the truck, and I get all the wood stacked up, I get back in the truck, I put the truck in gear, and I let off the clutch, and guess what happens? The hoist comes up on the stupid truck. And so I put it back down, and I drive away, and as I'm driving away, the owner of the house comes out the front door. And I was like, that's really weird, because I really thought I was alone in the backyard. And then what I put together later, because I saw the sympathy in the man's eyes, is that he had actually been standing there with his 3 teenage daughters at their back window, watching a 300-pound man beat the tar out of a truck and then completely bawl. Right? This was not a private moment. So he walks up to me with such compassion and sympathy in his eyes, and he hands me a $20 bill, and he's like, I can just see what he was trying to say is, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be all right. I take his money and I drive away, right? Now the reason I tell you that story is because probably a lot of you can relate, at least with that kind of incident, where you've got your plan and you just need a little help. You need a little guide. You need something to happen. You're trying to get God to work on your page. In fact, some of you might say that describes my entire life. That's me in a nutshell. I've got this plan and I'm trying to work the plan and it's just not coming together. And the reason is because in our heart we plan our course, but it's God. God's got the final say. He's the one that's going to establish or determine our steps. And so how do we get this to happen? How do we get on the same page as God? And the place I want to start today, I want to talk about David, the life of David. Because you look at him, God described David this way. He didn't describe anybody else this way, but he described David this way. He said this, David is a man after my own heart. He didn't say that about Abraham. He didn't say that about Moses. He said that about David. There was something special about David. And as we look at the life of David, he is like one of these guys that has these highs and these lows and these ups and these downs all throughout his life. And right in the middle of it all, through the whole course of his life, he is right in the middle somehow of God's plan and God's will for his life. And so there's really nobody better that we can look at to try to figure out what it means to be a man after God's, or a man or a woman after God's own heart. So we're going to look at the life of David. David's life starts like this. It starts with a huge success, about as big a success as there is in the Bible. David starts when he is very young by killing Goliath. Right? That's a great way to start your life. Killed a giant. So that, the story goes, and probably most of you know it, he comes over the hillside, and there's this 9-foot-tall, seasoned veteran warrior, and everybody else is shaking and quaking with fear in all of Israel, and they look up and they're just and he's taunting them, and they're just we can't even think about it, we don't know what we're going to do, we're just kind of a mess. And the challenge is, there just needs to be one man that comes out and fight him, and there's nobody in Israel with the guts or the faith to go against him. And David, this just shows David's heart. He walks up and he's like, I can do it. Sure, I'll do this. And they're like, you sure? And he's like, yeah. And so they send him out there. Now the best part of the story of David and Goliath, because you probably heard the story before, the best part is the dialogue. The dialogue between Goliath and David. This is how the dialogue goes. When David goes out to see him, Goliath looks down and he's like, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field. He's just like, that's not going to be a problem at all. Now listen to this, because this is where we begin to really see that David is really, really different from everybody else. David responds, this very day, the Lord, he's sure, the Lord will deliver you into my hand. And I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give you the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of earth. Listen to why. Next one. So that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. And so David, as you know, takes out the slingshot. He has 5 stones, he only uses 1. He takes it, he slings it, goes into his head, knocks him down. Now, the best part of this story for our family, right? Because you always, if you tell your kids this story, you're like, one little stone went into the sling, knocked the giant down. The best part of the story that our kids love the most is then David ran over. This is not like the Sunday school version. David ran over, pulled out this enormous sword and cut off his head. And then he picks up the head and he holds it up. Blood coming out of there. He picks it up and he holds it up to the Philistine army and he holds it up to the Israelite army and he's like, we win, right? We did that. My kids, by far, favorite part of the story, right? Blood and guts. Anyway, so he does this, and this is how David starts his life, with this tremendous win, which is followed up with this tremendous bummer. Okay, so he goes back in and people start to sing his praise. And they begin to sing his praise. And they begin to say about Saul, who's king at the time, they say about Saul, he's killed his 1,000, but David, he's killed his 10,000s. And Saul all of a sudden begins jealous of David. And he begins to try to hunt him down and kill him. And for years, Saul is trying to kill David. For years. And then right in the middle of this is probably my favorite story of David. Right in the middle of this, David, it kind of dawns on David Saul's eventually going to kill me. He's going to get me. I've got no place to run. I've got no place to hide. Everybody's going to rat me out. I know what I'll do. I'll go to Gath. Here's what you got to know about Gath. First of all, Gath is a Philistine city. Right? Philistine, like the enemy. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I just saw Star Trek yesterday. So, only some of you will be able to make this connection. This would be like James Kirk hanging out with the Klingons. That work? Not very well. Okay, he's with the bad people. Anyway, this is like him going against his dire enemy. And on top of that, not only is Gath a Philistine city, but Gath is the hometown, and guess who? It's the hometown of Goliath. Goliath's hometown. That's where David decides he's going to go. So he goes to hide from his enemy in the city of his enemies. And I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if he's got some kind of elaborate disguise on or something like that, if he's just kind of walking around hoping nobody will notice him. And one day, I don't know what's going on, if they're buying fruit or something, these guys see him and they're like, pretty sure that's David, right? That's the guy that killed Goliath. And so they grab David and they take him to Achish. And they bring him before Achish, and this is how the story goes. But the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Right? So next one. So David not knowing what to do. I love this. This may be my favorite couple verses in the Bible. So David not knowing what to do, right? He was afraid of what was going on. He pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Right? Just imagine what this is like. They bring him in, mighty warrior David killed Goliath. They bring him in, and he's like, last minute decision. Probably right in the middle of it, he's like, what am I doing? And I love Achish's response. This is my favorite. Some of you, if you're an employer, you may have felt like this. Achish said to his servants, look at this man. He's insane. Why do you bring him into me? Listen to this. Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow to me? You ever felt like that? Don't I have enough crazy people already? You bringing me another one? And so Achish doesn't kill him, because he looks at him and he's like, well, that would just be sad to kill him. And so he kind of lets him alone. Now, here's why this is one of my favorite stories. Because I don't envision it through the eyes of David. I don't even envision it through the eyes of us looking back. Here's how I see it. I see it from God's perspective. Now, I've got absolutely no scriptural reason to believe that this is how it works, but I envision that God is like standing at the precipice of heaven, looking down. Right? And at this point, probably all of his attention is focused right on David. And I don't know if he does this, but I just imagine God explaining to heaven, everybody that's up there, his plan. Okay? I don't know if this is actually anything that happens, but I envision, maybe he's got like Gabriel and Michael and some of the angels up there in heaven. And maybe on top of that, some of the people from the Old Testament that have passed on and are up there now. And he's got Abraham and Moses, and he's got this whole group of people. And David's down there acting like an animal, scratching at the doorpost. And God's like, come here, look at that. See that? That's what I'm talking about. And they're like, this is a proud moment for you? Like, what are you? No, look at it. Think of it. He's got no idea what's going on. It's no clue. He's hiding from his enemy in the city of his enemy, and he's like so freaked out, he doesn't know what to do. He's down there acting like an animal. It's great. They're like, what? What are you talking about? Like, look at it. See, here's the part you can't see. Right in the middle of that, he still believes in me. No, even better than that. Right in the middle of it, right where he's at right now, he still wants to be a part of my plan, even though he doesn't get any of it. See, I told you. He's a man after my own heart. There is nothing that I can ask that man to do that he won't do. With a man like that, I can get some stuff done. And so God says, I'll prove it to you. So here's what happens next. God sets David up for a win in the middle of this situation. Achish looks at him and is like, I'm not going to kill him. That doesn't just be sad. Right? So God brings this rebel group of soldiers around David, and they make him their commander. And when I say a rebel group of soldiers, I mean they're basically these people that they're in debt. They don't have any money. They're running from the law. They're just kind of people that are looking for somewhere to go. And so these are not like the cream of the crop. okay? And they're brought to David. And David begins to live in Philistine territory, and Achish is like, I mean, if you want, you can work for me, because that's what you do with a crazy person. You offer him a job. And he says, you can work for me if you want to, and I'll promote you. And so he like sends him in this direction, and David's like, okay, yeah. And so David goes off to war. Now remember, the Philistines are at war with the Israelites. So David goes off to war. And Achish will turn to him and say, where are you going? He's like, oh, I'm going to go kill Israelites. Woo! And then he runs off with his group of soldiers, and they go attack and raid the enemies of Israel. And Achish never knows about it. For a year and a half, David goes around raiding like the Ammonites and all these other people that are enemies with the Israelite God. And he's out there living in the land of his enemies, winning the war. And nobody in Israel even knows about it. Nobody even knows that he's weakening these forces, and God completely uses him. Now, that's just David's life. I got to tell you got to go home and read 1 Samuel. And if you're sitting out there going, the whole thing, it'll take you an hour, okay? Hour and a half if you're a slow reader. Go home and read the way this works in David's life, because it goes like this, and up and down and up and down. And you see at every turn in the road, God working in his life. And he doesn't always get it, and he doesn't always understand it, but God is establishing his steps. And eventually Saul dies, he's able to return to Israel, and God establishes him as king. And David goes down in the record books as the greatest king of Israel and a man after God's own heart. Now, here's why I tell you this story. Let's get back to our tension here. Here's our tension. Proverbs 16:9 again. The tension is, we've got our plan, right? We've got our course that we're trying to set, and then God is establishing the steps. How do we get that to sync up? How do we make that work together? The reason I bring up David is because David actually specifically answers that tension. It's almost like he read that and he's like, I'm going to write an answer to that. I'm going to write a rebuttal to that. He answers that very specifically in the Psalms. Now the Psalms are like 150 chapters of these just different songs and poems and things that the godly men in the Old Testament wrote down these songs. A lot of them are written by different people. Moses wrote some of them, Solomon wrote some of them, David wrote a lot of them. And in Psalm 37, David is now an old man. He's lived out the whole roller coaster of his life. And he writes Psalm 37, and this is what he says. Lived my whole life, this is what I'll tell you. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. If you're out there saying, how do I get to that place where God is like establishing my steps? Here it is. If he delights in the Lord. Though he may stumble, and David did his share of stumbling in his life, he will not fall. For the Lord upholds him with his hand. Now, we got to figure out how to be that. And if you figure out how to be that, how to be somebody that delights in the Lord, then you will absolutely know whether you are in the will of God or not. All you got to figure out is whether or not you delight in the Lord. Now, when I first saw that word, I thought, I'm looking for a more manly word than that, right? Like I was a little bummed. And so what I did is I got into like the Hebrew, and I thought, I'm going to dig into there a little bit more. I'm sure there's like a really good like manly word for that, because I don't use that word very often. I'm not at a steakhouse and the waitress comes up and, did you enjoy your steak? It was delightful, right? So I'm looking for something a little bit more to it, and I got into it, and I was actually kind of depressed because I got in there, and that's actually the best trend. I mean, it's like this kind of almost feminine word that's like this kind of a girly word. But as I got into it a little more, this is how I would describe it. It's kind of like this. In my house, it's not very hard to impress my kids. Okay? It's not hard to be a hero in my house. I came home Friday night. This is all I got to do. I came home Friday night with a bag of double stuffed Oreos, right? And see, I walked in the house and I know how this is going to play out, right? I've got them in the Kroger bag and I walk in and I shut the door, and this is a Friday night for us. I walk up because my kids love food. I don't know if that's normal, but we trained them. Like, if you want to have a good time, eat something. May not be the healthiest thing to think of. Anyway, so walk in, I know how this is going to play out, right? I've got a bag of Oreos, and I've got them in the Kroger bag, and I lay them on the table, and my 12-year-old daughter kind of strolls over, like she can smell it, you know. She walks over and she looks at me and she's like, "So what's in the sack?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just some Oreos," and she's like, "Oreos." And then she announces to the house, "Hey, Dad got Oreos!" And all of a sudden you hear footsteps coming from all over the house. Doors are slamming, right? And they just all come, and we've trained them good somehow. But the first thing they do, because they want this to be repeated, they run up to me and they hug me and they say, "Thank you, Daddy," right? And then they go over and I can always see that gleam in their eye, right? When somebody pulls it out, right? And they open it up and the kids are just like, oh. You know, like this is the happiest moment of their life and they're going to eat these cookies. They are delighting in it, right? That's what that word means. They just look at it and that's the thing that they delight in. David says, if someone delights in the Lord, if somebody looks into God's word and God's law where he kind of explains who God is and what he wants, and they're just like, and that's the thing that puts a spark in their eye, that's the thing that brings them joy, and they look at their life and they say, there's nothing more than I want than to do God's will and to love the things that God loves and to hate the things that God hates. That person will find that his steps are established. And they may stumble, but they'll never fall. They may not always know what's going on. They may end up in really weird situations where they have to act like a crazy person just to spare their life. But that person who delights in the Lord is right smack dab in the middle of God's will and God's plan for their life. And that's all we have to worry about, and I can promise you, you will be in the will of God. So this is what I have said before, and I'll say it again many times. There is a blank that you and I have got to be able to fill in and be able to fill it in right. We're going to throw the blank up on the screen. Do everything for. You would say this about your life. I do everything for blank. If you get the right thing in this blank, I can promise you, you're part of God's plan. It may not always look like it, but you will be part of God's plan. You may never have a voice that comes down and says, I want you to go here and I want you to do that. I mean, it may not always be just crystal clear. But if you fill in this blank, God is going to use you for his plan. So, how do we fill in that blank? If we get this wrong, if we put in the wrong thing in there, it's going to change everything about the course and direction of our life. So, we've got a couple options here. The first thing is we can say, I do everything for me. Right? And I want you to understand, this is how most of us think. Right? We think about ourselves. It all comes back to there. So we're at the beginning of the day, when we think about God's plan and his God, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about, is this going to make me happy? Right? Is this going to get me what I want? Is this going to be is this going to cause people to say the right thing about me? Are people going to be proud of me? Well, we circle around that, and we're always concerned with us. And let me tell you this. If that's how you fill in that blank in your life, if you wake up and say, I'm concerned with me and for me, I'll tell you, God may or may not give you everything that you want, but I can tell you this. He will never establish your steps. He will never set your course to work in his plan. He will never make you a part of his plan. I do everything for me. The second option, of course, this is how it's so simple, but if we get this blank right, I do everything for God. That's what drives me. That's the point of my life. I wake up every day. I'm not trying to figure out what's good for me. I'm trying to figure out what's good for God. See, right? If David's in the middle of acting like a crazy person, he'd be like, forget this. Right? I've seen this happen to so many people over time. They go through an experience like this where it's like God wasn't there, right? And they're just like, forget this, because the bottom line is, they don't wake up and think, I do everything for God. They wake up and they say, I do everything for me. If you fill in that blank and say, do everything for me, you're just going to be like absolutely so enthralled with what's happening in the kingdom of God and what's God's getting done that you're not even going to care about your life. And if you get that, then you will be a man or a woman after God's own heart. So one final statement. I think it's as simple as this. Do everything for God, and He will establish your steps. You may be an old man or an old woman before you look back at your life and go, He did establish my steps. That isn't what you have to worry about. Just do everything for God, and He will establish your steps. Let me pray for you. God, I pray today as we get ready to move into a time of communion, I pray that you would really reveal the heart of each person in here. God, I pray as they come and sit before you and they think about how to fill that blank, I pray that you would show them the things or the people or what they've put in that blank besides you. God, as we come to worship you and to seek you, I pray that we would take whatever it is in our life that goes in that blank, and we would get rid of it. And we would just say, I don't care about anything but you. God, I pray that you would teach this group of people, teach me as we go out this week. I pray that you would teach us what it means to delight in you. God, I pray that in Christ's name. Amen.